So I also use Sublime, by the way. So that's why my terminal might look funky.
That's Sublime.
Well, I like to install packages.
Oh, okay.
So if you want to download Sublime and you want all the same packages that I use, I can give them to you. So make sure this is bigger. You can't see this very well, can you? Oh no. How do I make this part bigger? Is this too small? Alright, that's fine. So with Kevin, you guys made like a tweet app when you were introduced to ORMs. Is that true or false?
True.
Okay, so you guys are familiar with an app that looks like this, right?
It's so fancy.
Yeah, there's some cool fonts in here too. So if I were to run this app, which how do we run apps again? I think it's in bin. Bin is when we. This is the app that asks me for a tweet. I can enter my username, Kevy Wevy. What should Kevy Wevy say today? Huh? Yum? Like yum? Like he's hungry? Alright. So, we got all our tweets. We got Janie Waney in there, says hello world. I actually just started using Twitter like 2 days ago, so I'm very new to this Twitter thing. And Kevy Webby says yum. This is the kind of app you guys built. Looks familiar, right? So we're going to learn about mass assignment, which is a slightly different way of doing things, and Active Record kind of works with mass assignment under the hood. And we're going to refactor some of this code to show you how mass assignment works. Some of it might get a little bit technical because we're talking about how Active Record works under the hood, and you haven't really been introduced to Active Record very much yet. So if it gets too much, that's okay. You don't have to absorb every single thing, but as long as you kind of get the idea and you understand that, okay, we're going to be moving into Active Record next, then you're in good hands. And so what we're going to do is going to remove ID, because we don't need that. And we're going to talk about if I had a bunch of variables in my initialize method, like what's the problem with that? Like right now, all we have is username and message. If I were to run my rate console, and you guys have all used rate console before, right? You guys haven't used rate console? So we'll get into that a little bit. Basically, when you use Active Record, there's something called a rake file that actually provides tasks for you. Has anyone used rake before? Yeah. Some people have. I know there were some labs released on it, maybe not a lot of labs, but it basically allows you to start like a pry session or something like that. So when you run rake console, it opens your pry session and allows you to have access to variables. So that's how I was able to run rate console and get this pry session, and we actually have access to our tweets. So I can do something like tweet.new. And what does our tweet take? What are the arguments? Yeah. So username and message. And how would I pass these in if I wanted to write a message as Jane that says something like hello world? So as strings, right? Jane, heard that. And then the next one? Hello world. Owl. I've been reading too much Harry Potter. So this creates a new tweet, right? So our rate console is actually allowing us to have access to these tweets. But if we had a bunch of things here, like say we wanted to put age, address, first name, last name, is hungry, always an important Boolean to include, favorite animal, hobbies, pets, things like that. What's kind of like annoying about this? Louder? What did you say?
You're putting a lot of things
Yeah, so there's a lot of things here. Where else will these things need to appear?
I mean, at age, at address, zone side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're gonna have to list every single one of these things with at symbols. Where else are we gonna have to list all of this out? Exactly. We're also gonna have to list all of this out in the accessor. And that's kind of the problem that mass assignment is gonna help us solve. So does anyone know about how mass assignment works? Or how we can solve this problem with maybe passing just one argument instead of all of these arguments? Is there like any kind of collection that you know of that's like one value and it can have multiple pieces of data in it?
Either
Jeff?
an array or a hash.
Exactly, an array or a hash will work. Which one do you think we're gonna use? Why is your inclination hash? It is a hash. That is the right answer. Hashes are useful because you can specify what each of the keys are as you say what it is.
Maybe because each one has a value. According to it.
Exactly. Each one has a key and a value. So you say like, what is this attribute I'm trying to write? What is the key? I don't then have to remember that, oh, I have to pass in a string of username first, then message, then age, then address. None of them are labeled. It's just strings. I have to remember what is the 5th argument, what is the 8th argument, and pass them in the exactly right order. If we use a hash, we don't have to do that anymore. So if you Google what is mass assignment, that's exactly what mass assignment does for you. It's a very common pattern in Ruby and also in Active Record that allows you to initialize an object using a hash instead of putting in keys individually, right? So what do I need to do to turn this into a hash? And let's actually prelude this with saying that the ones we're going to use for today are going to be username, message. What other ones should we include? Let's just stick it to 4. Hmm?
Is hungry. Yeah.
Is hungry. Always an important Boolean to include. And one more.
Retweet.
Retweet? What kind of data type would that be?
Oh.
Date.
Okay, we can put that. That's fine. So we're going to put these 4, right? So we'll have is hungry. Am I spelling things correctly? And then date. So if we were to turn this into a hash, what do we need to do? There's kind of like a few things that need to happen in order for this still to work. All right, let's see what happens right now. I'll get out of this pry and now I can test my code. So right now, if I want to make a tweet happen, I can do like tweet.new, and I can pass in a username, Janie Waney, a message, hey there, is hungry, true, yeah, always true, I'm always hungry, and date, maybe we'll put today, or something like that.
No, Janie didn't win yet.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh no. I'm so used to this because that's exactly how you're gonna be doing it in Active Record. Every day this happens. So this is the typical way that we do it. If I were to change this to one argument, an attributes hash, what do I need to do to these to work? And maybe it would help if we actually tried to invoke it with a hash, right? So I have to restart my pry. See, it's not happy. Maybe we can debug this a little bit. So our attributes hash is currently empty. But what do we want it to look like if we wanted to include attributes? What do hashes typically include? Key value pairs. So what kind of key value pairs would we include for this one?
Message, username.
Exactly. So our hash is going to look something like this, right? Message, hello world, username, and it could be in any order because hashes are unordered collections, unlike arrays, which you always have to be in order. Is hungry. So this is what we want our input to look like. So when we invoke tweet.new, it's actually going to take this one thing as an argument. So let's actually try that in our pry. It didn't hit the pry. Did I save it? All right, there we go. So now attributes hash looks like this. Will this work? Like if I exit my pry, it's not happy. It didn't give me a new tweet like I wanted to. I was like, hey, create this tweet for me. I gave you the message, the username, the hunger status, and the date, but it was like, no, undefined local variables. So how do I fix that?
You gotta put the accessor.
What do you mean by that? Put accessors here?
Like the is hungry and stuff, I think.
Up here?
Yes.
I do need that eventually. That is true. But usually when you initialize, it doesn't worry about the accessors right away. That's only when you're trying to read a piece of data or write a piece of data afterward.
You need to look inside of the attributes hash. You need to look at the keys for each attribute.
All right, so how do we access a key inside of this hash? So if I have this hash, I save it to, well, it's already saved as attributes hash, right? I have to restart this. So it's already saved to attributes hash. How do I access like the message, for example? Mm-hmm. Yes, Woody?
I think you put attributes,
Like this?
hash,
Mm-hmm.
I think you said forgot how to do it.
Guys, think about Hashkibal. You have a hash. There's a very simple formula for grabbing a value out of a hash. Jeff?
So you got that, so that in square brackets, you put the single message.
Exactly. So this will give me the thing that I want.
I thought you were looking for the value, not the key.
So it does give me the value. So like the formula for accessing something out of a hash is you give it the hash and in brackets you put the key and then it actually gives you the... Oh, okay. I understand the confusion now. Yeah, that's fine. So we actually still want to create these variables, but now how do we access each thing? What do I need to do? Because before we had 4 arguments. Now if I try to pass in 4 arguments, it's going to break. Well, actually, it's not going to break, but how do I make it work with 1 argument and assign these properly?
Do you have to put like at message equals attributes underscore hash square
Mhm.
brackets? That's
Exactly. So now I have access to all of the data inside the hash if I were to do my attributes hash. Let me see. I just learned this trick recently. I'm very pleased with it. You guys know this trick? So useful.
We just learned it recently.
So now I'm still writing all of these instance variables, but I'm assigning them to a key from the hash, and nothing should break. So let's try it out with this thing. So it creates my tweet, right? So what are the advantages of doing it this way? Miles?
Like when you're creating an instance of the variable, you can like just set up a hash and you don't have to like type every value out into a new statement. Like you can just be like dot new and then give it the name of whatever that hash is.
Yeah, you could do that if you already had a predefined hash. You can just pass that in. Any other advantages?
You
Raphael?
have to specify an order for each one. So you just put
Mm-hmm. And that's,
one.
yeah, that's really useful because I don't have to suddenly remember the order. The other thing I find useful is like, now these things are actually labeled. As before, it was just strings and I had to like remember, oh, the first one was the username, the second one was the message. But having a hash, it actually tells me what each thing is. I can flip the order. It doesn't really matter. There are a few other advantages too. So, for instance, what happens if I don't include some of the attributes that my program usually takes? Like it usually takes is hungry and the date, but I didn't include them. What do you think will happen?
It'll still work.
It will still work. Any other details? Do you think those attributes will exist or no? Miles says yes. Why?
Like it'll just put maybe nil as the values for those because it'll just be trying to access something that's not in the hash and it'll just return nil.
That is a good guess, and that is what happens. So that's another advantage of this. If you only have some information, you don't have all of the different values, it's still going to know about what they should be, and it'll instantiate them to nil. You can write them later, and nothing breaks. What if we actually put some extra arguments that it doesn't expect, like pizza? Cool. What do you think will happen? Think about it logically.
Would it create a new key value?
That's one guess. Think about it based on how this is written. Like, think how the computer would think when it instantiates a new object. Lizelle?
Just throw it out like I don't even know what this is.
It just doesn't include it, right? Because it's going to take this hash and it's like, well, I'm only going to assign the message, the username, the is hungry, and the date part of this hash. And it's not even going to look at the other things in the hash. And nothing will break. So now we have this extra value and it didn't get included, and it's fine. Our program works. There is another advantage, and this is, I don't know if it's an advantage or not, but it's more of like another one of those Ruby syntactic sugars that with hashes, when you pass them in as arguments, you don't need to include the curly braces. So it like saves you a few keystrokes, and it still works. So we're gonna get a little bit more technical about how this works under the hood in Active Record. But if the only thing you take away from this lecture today, if there's only one thing you take away, I want it to be this, that when we're using Active Record, you're going to be instantiating objects like this. where you're gonna do like some object dot new, and then you're gonna pass in a hash without curly braces in active record, so don't get confused. It's just syntactic sugar for it being a hash. And you're gonna indicate all of the different attributes that you have. And this is what it's gonna look like when you use active record. So that's the only thing that you remember today. Just remember that and understand that it's secretly a hash, even though it might not look like one. All right, so let's get a little bit more technical because Kevin likes to do this thing about the dot send method. You know what he always does? He's like, hello, my name is Kevin. Or Kevy Webby. And then he likes to show you guys methods. He does things like, let's split this on n. Does he do this a lot?
He did it like once.
Oh, he likes to do it. And so then you get stuff like that. Oh, cool, I got an array and all the n's were taken out because we use the n as a delimiter, is what it's called. And then he's like, well, there's this method called send. Does anyone remember how that works? Miles?
You can like specify the name of the method that you want to send the input to and then the input. So it's like just a weird way of calling the method.
Exactly. So it's like the way that I guess Ruby calls methods under the hood. So you can specify a method as a what kind of data type? It's actually as a string. So you can do like split. So if you call the .send method on any kind of data type, on strings or on arrays, and then you just put a .send afterward, and its first argument is going to be what method you're trying to send to it to do, and other arguments after that are going to be the arguments that that method normally takes. So that's like another way of calling methods. And so we can actually use this .send thing to refactor how this is written. And we don't actually need to state every single one of these attributes one at a time. We can actually iterate over the hash. Does anyone have any ideas of how we can start? Do you remember how to iterate over a hash? Like, how do you access each key value pair, like in an abstract way instead of having to physically write each single attribute? How did you do it in HashGibble?
With the like attributes hash.each.
Exactly.
So do
Do.
some pipes.
What's in the pipes when you use .each on a hash? Because it's different from arrays.
Key value, key value.
Key value. And what we're trying to emulate is sending a method, sending a writer method. So let's actually review the writer and reader methods that active record, or not even active record, but that these attribute accessors write for us. So when you see attribute accessor, we write a reader and a writer method for each of these, right? So we actually write something like def message for our reader message, or our reader method, and it returns the message, right? We can write a writer method. Does anyone remember what that one looks like?
Message
Use.
Message equals, exactly, that's a writer method. And it allows us to rewrite the instance variable to whatever is passed in. New message. So you can actually use the .send method on instances, because you can use it on anything. So let's look at what we had before. We made a tweet at some point, right? Let's use this tweet. Ignore the pizza. Have you guys learned this trick before? Yeah, the underscore basically gives you the last thing that you returned. And so I'm saving it to a variable so I can use it. So how do I read the message? What do I need to do? No trick question. The easy way of reading the message on this tweet. Tweet.message. What if I wanted to use that send thing to read the message? So look at this example. Any guesses? Miles?
Tweet dot send, and then in quote message.
Mm-hmm. Because the dot send works on anything. It can work on instances too. And it just takes an argument in quotes of the method. And it just invokes that method. And our reader wrote this reader message. This reader method message. That is a tongue twister, guys. So, if we wanted to make a writer, we wanted to change what the tweet message says, how do we normally do it? Here's your starting clue. Also not a trick question.
Equals and then change it.
Equals. So maybe goodbye. So now we were able to change this tweet. So we see it's different now. Because we have a writer method, and our writer method looks like this. But our syntactic sugar of Ruby allows us to invoke it with like spaces here and no parentheses, right? So if we wanted to invoke that writer method, but using .send, does anyone have any idea where to start? What method are we trying to send? I heard someone say it. Message equals. That's the name of our writer method. And then the other argument is whatever that method takes, and that method takes whatever you want to change the message to. So we can change it to test. I want to make sure it's something different to make sure it works. So now our tweet message was overwritten again. All right, cool. So now we know how to write these messages using .send. And so what we're trying to achieve is what we did here, basically. To be able to do something like this for every single attribute as we iterate over it. Any ideas? What is tweet? Inside of the initialize method, what is going to be the tweet? Self, exactly. Self. And then?
Send.
Exactly, send. And then, what kind of data type is this? A writer is not a data type, it's a type of method. It's a string, right? String. Now how can we include what each attribute is in kind of an abstract way so that it works for all of them? String interpolation, there you go. So, that's the key, right? All right.
And then out of,
Comma,
and then interpolating it
interpolate what?
for value. I think
I don't think you actually need to interpolate for value. I think you just do that. But look very carefully.
So we did equals after the
Yes. We do need an equals.
Keys equal. Oh, outside.
Right, because it has to match this string, and only this part of the string is the part that changes, and equals appears after all of them. So here we're able to actually iterate through every key in the hash and make a writer, or like invoke the writer method for that key, assuming that that writer method appears here. So that way you don't have to write all this code. And that's kind of what active record will do for you. So let's actually test it out. I'll restart the pry. So it gave me an error because I'm still including pizza. But I'll try it again without pizza. It was like, hey, I don't know what to do with this particular key because it's looping through every single one. Now what is it unhappy about?
You have the bracket on one end.
Yeah, I have this bracket missing. So now it creates the object. And again, you don't actually need these curly braces and it still works. So pretty cool, right? Only thing is, the pizza breaks. We don't want the pizza to break. We don't want to be throwing errors all the time just because we have some extra keys in there that we weren't accounting for. There's a fix for this too. That one you may probably not know off the top of your head, but you can write an if statement to check whether that's like a valid key or not. And we can do that with the respond to method. I don't know if Kevin has showed you that one before. So if you have any type of data again, like a string, we can do .send, right? You can also do .respond to and pass in a method name like split, which we know works on strings. And the respond to method will return true if that's a valid method that this thing responds to. So that's like cool stuff underneath the hood that Ruby uses that you can now actually use if you wanted to. If you ever wanted to check if something responds to a method, you can give it some method that it doesn't respond to, and you can see that it returns false. Any ideas of how we can incorporate an if statement using this so that our program doesn't break for attributes that won't work? No ideas? Let's start with if. So what are we checking if it responds to what method? Okay. Is it key respond to send or send respond to key?
I feel like that the value responds to the setter.
So it's the thing that we're calling the method on, right? So hi, we want to see if calling split on hi is something that hi will respond to. And the thing that we call the method on is the tweet, right?
So if sell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dot send,
Mm-hmm.
dot respond to.
Is it send or is it just respond to?
Just respond to.
Yeah.
Respond to. So and dot key, right?
So this thing, basically.
Key equals. Boom. And then if that, then what?
So
Throw it out.
let's see why my linter is yelling at me. PSA announcement. Please download a linter. I'm more of a JavaScript person, so a lot of time my linter just kind of breaks in Ruby mode, because it's like, I don't know what a tweet is. Well, yeah, you do know what a tweet is. But here it's actually telling me the truth. It actually knows that this thing doesn't respond. You can't use the method respond to. So what did I do wrong? What am I missing? Missing a question mark.
Yeah.
Because in Ruby, methods that return booleans usually have a question mark after them. Now my linter stopped yelling at me. Thank you, linter. All right. So now we're checking, is this method something that tweet will respond to, this writer method? If it is, then write that attribute. Only if it's something that it responds to. So if there's extra stuff in my hash that it doesn't know how to respond to, it won't break my program. So that's kind of the more technical part of how Active Record will work under the hood. I did not restart my Pry, so this won't work. But let's test it out with pizza. And it still works. And it doesn't include pizza. So what's the only thing you need to remember from this lecture? You don't need to know how all of this stuff works. What's the thing I want you guys to remember?
We can throw a hash in there.
Yes, that when you use Active Record and you see something like this, it's secretly using a hash. And this is how you will be using Active Record. You'll be passing it in something that doesn't look like a hash, but it actually is, with all your key attributes or your key value pairs. These representing the attributes that your program knows about. And you can put them in any order, super useful. You don't need the curly braces. You can include the curly braces if you want to. So let's take a break, and then we'll reconvene and talk about Active Record.
I got a question because I've been confused most of the lecture.
That's
To
okay.
be honest. So when you make something a hash and has key value pairs,
Mhm.
you initialize something, it's checking the key value, right? Sorry, the word escapes me. What
Attributes?
attribute? It's checking the attributes, right? So it's checking the keys.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you initialize something, you can put it in any order. What if two different things have strings? Like how would it know? So example, date, right? And
Right.
message, both are strings.
Right.
But if you initialize it with the date and the method as a string, how would it know that the string isn't for message and not for date? Does that make sense?
Because it actually will look at the key. It won't look at the value. It'll look at each of these keys.
So how does order, I'm not getting how order doesn't matter then
For hashes?
for the initializing. So it's like when you give the argument, the order won't matter, right?
So your initialize method will only take one argument.
One arg.
The place where order mattered was when your initialize method took multiple arguments. And when you initialized, you had to provide those arguments in an exact order. But now you're passing in just one argument, which is a hash. And a hash is an unordered collection, which means you can have key value pairs in there. And they're in any order that you want. So I don't know if you remember from Hashkeball, and if this makes it look any better. Usually we see hashes like that.
I mean, it makes sense, right? So when you tweet something, you're only putting in one argument.
Yeah, exactly. And the argument is a value that has all of those pieces of data inside it. It's a hash.
Okay, so okay.
And then here, like with the easier way, we're manually assigning each of these things to the value of the key of that hash. And then with this other way that we did it, we loop over each of these key value pairs one at a time, and we invoke the writer method for that particular key and give it the value to write that thing in our initialize method. All right. Is that all? Any other questions? Don't worry too much about this. Let's take a break.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is not something you'll be asked to implement pretty much ever. This is more to demystify the next thing we're going to look at, which is something you'll be asked to implement.
Exactly.
The next
But
thing would look like magic if we didn't show
Exactly.
you how this works.
And-
I've never had to write this code outside of the lab.
I've never learned this before, and I was using active record and I was fine. Although I did kind of think it was magic and I didn't actually get that it was a hash. So, and also imagine if you can bring this up on an interview. That's pretty cool that you know how it works under the hood. All right, let's take a break. What happened to my... Where are you, Quickly?
Basically just use it